So I won't re-thank, but I feel like I should, for sure, thank Balance. I met Renee. He's been very sweet, giving me space in his office to breathe. And I wouldn't really be here without my forever sister-in-law, who's in the back somewhere, Liz Moggins, who recommended me for this talk. So thank you. And I just really love the idea that you all came out here to hear about anxiety. I mean, it's just really pretty cool. So I'm thinking that we have something in common, right? If you're all interested. And so I just want to start, mostly for me, so I can take a breath, right? Just kind of hear and watch the flow. That's nice, right? And the thing about flow is that things are moving, right? Things are constantly moving. In fact, right where I shot this 2 winters ago with my lovely husband, who's also in the back, in South Carolina, right now the same thing is happening, which I always find kind of utterly astounding that it's still going on. So flow is going to weave itself into this talk today. The talk, which I titled Good Medicine. I've got some big pills here. Some good medicine and some thoughts on managing anxiety through self-compassion. So I've been thinking about good medicine for a long time, about 8 years to be exact. I sort of conjure up really big ideas when I'm in the woods with my husband, camping. And I kept thinking about all these ways we could perhaps write ourselves our own prescriptions. Not the kind that come up here in pill form, in pill bottles. Although there's a disclaimer I want to make that I'm not saying that medication doesn't work, because medication can work. However, alone, maybe not so well. And so this idea that we could add in more prescriptions of our own, write our own prescriptions to stock up this really nice, hearty medicine cabinet, right? So we have things to draw from. So interspersed throughout this morning, I might be putting a few of my own prescriptions in the mix. The other disclaimer is that you might have read a little bit about me. I hope you didn't, but if you did, yeah, I have some credentials, and I see people as a counselor. I teach, and so I guess I have a fair level of expertise. And yet, my expertise really lies in making contact with my own anxiety and really staying with my anxiety and getting help for my anxiety, which I'll tell you about as we move. So I'm freaking out, right? I'm like, oh my God, I'm going to do this talk on anxiety. I'm totally freaking out, which was hilarious, right? I'm watching my own mind, and I'm like, I'm anxious about this talk about anxiety. And so what came to me driving home from campus the other day was a memory, not one I completely forgot, but one that I just hadn't thought of for a really long time. And so I was 4 or 5, so it was like 68, 69, right? And like all good parents, my mom and dad took me to the local Y in Canton, Ohio. And I'm not saying anything bad about the Y, by the way, but what I remember is, and I'm not sure where I was in my swimming classes, but what I remember is standing on the edge of the diving board and looking at the deep end. Perhaps this was my graduation. And I can't remember, it's kind of fuzzy, of whether I jumped or whether I was pushed. But I can tell you that what happened next has stayed with me, in that I kept going under the water and I kept gasping for air and water in my throat and in my nose and flailing and floundering and wondering why my mother would not come out behind the glass window where they're observing. I mean, they might have been smoking, I don't know. But obviously I made it, right? I made it to the edge. And so the metaphor is not lost on me, right? I love metaphor. So, right, we sink or swim. And so I've been thinking about, like, wow, how did that sort of get imprinted on me, this most, primitive attempt at survival. So anxiety, right, is just this product of having the freedom to make choices if we can take action, if we push ourselves or perhaps we're pushed. So, like a good presenter, I looked up the definition of anxiety, and I thought I'd spare you the diagnostic manual's criteria for anxiety and give you the good old-fashioned layman's definition. So anxiety is a feeling of worry, of nervousness or unease about something with an uncertain outcome. I mean, that's hilarious, right? Because isn't that like every moment we don't know what's going to happen next? My God, right? So we have so many things to worry about, right? We worry about our kids. We worry about our jobs. We worry about our aging parents. We worry about our mortgage, our student loans. We might even worry a missile is incoming. Oh, no, that was a false alarm. I mean, if you have anxiety already, dear Lord. So we live in a time that more and more people from different disciplines are talking about this age of anxiety that we live in, right? With our constant connection and our barrage of bad news and technology that we can't seem to disconnect with. And that's a whole other talk, but there's a lot of anxiety produced by our interface with technology. And so I went a little farther back, and so the Danish philosopher Kierkegaard really argued that anxiety is a part of our human nature. And this next piece I just found and am continuing to find so rich, which is that anxiety arises where possibility and actuality come into contact, right? And so the present touches the future. I'm going to put down my pills. Right? So it's that sweet spot, that tension right in the middle where we have to make a decision, or perhaps we can't make a decision, which is where some of us land in being paralyzed by our anxiety. And so I want to tell you about my hustle. Okay, my husband, who's in the back, who's hiding, he's not hiding. He has told me over the years that I have some hustle. And I have really not liked that. Like I've always sort of thought as hustle as being kind of ingenuous or fraudulent. And so I looked up the definition to hustle, right? And so hustle can be a verb, right? We can hustle into this crowded room and get our seats. Hustle, I think, in the sweetest way my husband meant, was to sell or promote energetically and aggressively, which I've done a lot in my life, and yet I continue to find myself in places like this where I have an inner critic saying, you don't know what you're talking about. They're going to find out. You don't really know what you're talking about, right? Where we end up maybe feeling like a fraud. I really like this Urban Dictionary definition of hustle, right? Which is to have the courage, the confidence, the self-belief, and the self-determination to just go out there and work it out until you find the opportunities you want in life. I think this is what my husband Ben was alluding to, this kind of hustle. I wish you could see this. I've been watching this over and over and over. Fantastic. Look at that. Look how happy they are. This is where it gets really good. Look at them go. Do you realize this helps me to do a little dancing? For any of you that know me, dancing is one of my prescriptions. If there's dancing allowed, I'm there. Okay, so you get the idea, right? Although you probably, but let's just do this for the rest of the talk. So you can turn it up. Oh, we can't get it to go away.
We can do this. We have the power.
Okay, so do it, right? Do the hustle. Oh, that helped me, right? So that's one of my own doses of good medicine. So when I made really direct contact with my own anxiety was after 9/11. And after 9/11, I began to panic. After being lulled night after night into sleep, getting into that sweet spot of REM sleep, I would wake up in a fetal position, sometimes with my nearly two-year-old, with me. And I was terrified. I just continued to be terrified and panicked. I feel it right now, those old feelings. And I knew that I needed help, right? I knew that anyone that knows me knows too that tears come sometimes. I knew I needed help, right? And so like all the clients that I've ever worked with, all the people that I've ever loved, anyone who will listen who has a problem, I usually suggest that they ask for help, right? And so I did. Enter the Tibetan Buddhists, right? So I began studying with some Tibetan Buddhists, and boy, do the Tibetan Buddhists know a lot about anxiety. They know a lot about anxiety. The Buddhists teach us sort of foundationally that pain in this lifetime is unavoidable, right? We have all suffered. We have all experienced heartbreak. We have all been in the dark place alone, feeling like we may not be able to go on. So acknowledging this unavoidable pain, how then do we move forward? How do we transform? And so suffering is a piece, right? And so the Buddhists believe that while pain is unavoidable, suffering is optional, right? Not that any of us choose to suffer. However, it's when we take that action in that sweet spot of tension to do something different. Sometimes it's just about us stopping and reconnecting with our body. So it's counterintuitive, right, to stay in the darkness. It's counterintuitive to stay in the pain and the heartbreak, and yet we need to do that in order to transform, in order to sort of flow, right? We need to stay there. And yet we're so hardwired from such an early age that when we have feelings, right, that we should probably shut them down. So if I have a hissy fit, if I'm freaking out, if I'm crying, if I'm angry, if I'm frustrated, if I'm worried, the messages many of us got early on were don't cry, don't be mad, don't worry, it's okay, right? Which is not really helpful, right? But we learn to shut all that down. We learn that that's the way that we do our feelings. And so then maybe some of you have grown up and found out that those feelings continue to reemerge until we play around with them and until we stay in the dark place and let it flow through. And so this is where I think self-compassion really comes in with managing our own anxiety. You know, that way that we are so empathetic and understanding and kind and loving and just open to children that we love, right? When they make a mistake, when they make a bad choice, we offer them so much forgiveness and hope. And yet when we fall down, when we make bad choices, or when we just can't handle it, we may beat ourselves up. You know, maybe I'm too hard on myself. Maybe I just can't do this, right? So the trick, right, is sort of turning in all that good stuff that we give away to other people and give it back to ourselves. I can say for sure that I spent many a year coming home depleted because I'd given it all away. And so I became mindful of wanting to show up as my best self at home, right? Because at the end of the day, that's the important place, the soft place to land. And so I'm throwing out in these last few slides some of my own doses of good medicine with the idea that you could also too write your own prescription. And so some of my own prescriptions are really simple. They're stopping and noticing and continuing to notice. So when I'm waiting for the health line and the sky's beautiful and I've got a good shot, I take it. And I keep paying attention, right? Looking all around me. And I garden, and I think allowing ourselves the time and the nourishment and the patience and all the right ingredients so that we can grow fully. For us to, despite the odds, stay rooted, right? To continue upward and forward. To recognize there's so much beauty all around us. We all got a whole bunch of good medicine this morning, right? We got some coffee and there was a lot of laughter and hugging and this beautiful space and it's warm. And even in the dark and in the cold and being alone in the woods and alone in our thoughts and maybe in our dark place, there are always signs of life. And if we're lucky, we can see ourselves in that moment, not anywhere in the past, not anywhere in the future, but right in that moment. And we do this with pride, right? For ourselves and our city. And so I think these daily doses, right, of medicine are everywhere. What we need to do is we need to say yes. And we need to continue to flow, which means moving over and over again. And just for the record, I'm a great swimmer. And I do so with a whole lot of flow and a fair amount of hustle. Thanks.